So one of the aircraft we have on display here, and one of the very few shapes, it's just a pure replica. One of those very few replicas on the floor is our BF-109 G6. This is built to resemble a very specific model of BF-109. The BF-109 was the second most produced aircraft in history, behind the Soviet IL-2 ground attack bomber. The BF-109 Interceptor was the second most produced aircraft in history, with over 33,000 built. They were built from 1935 to 1945. The Germans made a whole bunch of different versions. They started with the BF-109. The first variant was the A, and by the end of the war, they had made it all the way up to a version called the K4, which was just a little bit after this one. This aircraft represents a BF-109 built in 1944 specifically to fight American bombers. When this was donated to us, we had the choice. How are you going to paint it? You can make it look like any plane you want. My input was, if you're going to have a BF-109 on display and it's this particular model, it's probably best to have the top German pilot of the war. So the number one fighter pilot on the German side in World War II was a man named Erich Hartmann, and he has 352 victories. The vast majority of those were against Russian or Soviet aircraft. He was not in the war at the early stage when it was 109s fighting biplanes. When he was in the war, he was fighting against well-trained and highly motivated Soviet pilots in modern aircraft. So it wasn't a crapshoot. It wasn't easy. There was no easy days for this pilot, and he still amassed 352 victories. Now, some history books say that he actually shot down Mustangs. We've tried to pull apart as many of the victories as we could, and one thing we've discovered is that the story attributed to him about him shooting down Mustangs toward the last week of the war, we don't believe that happened. But his actual victory list, the 352 victories he lists, those are Soviet. And this aircraft has been painted today to look like a winter version of his BF-109 G6. The G6 is typified by the bulges for the machine guns on top of the cowling, and also this one has bulges on the wings that go to an additional set of 20mm cannons. So those two things tells us what version of the BF-109 this is, and the paint job tells us approximately what time in the war it was. Now, we've painted it in the personal markings of that pilot, Erich Hartmann. We even have the little red heart on the side to his wife. He was shot down several times in the war, but he survived. He spent 10 years in a Soviet prisoner of war camp after the war, and when he was released, he was a tiny shell of a man. He was very skinny, but he lived for many years after the war, and a couple of my friends wrote the book about him, Blonde Knight of Germany. So that is our BF-109, and again, this is a replica. There's nothing in here that's real. What you're looking at is plywood that has been shaped into the rough approximation of a BF-109. We had a gentleman come in the museum one day that was a preacher, and he said that he built model airplanes. He offered to donate some of his model airplanes, a Mustang, a Spitfire, Corsair, and he also had a BF-109 in the truck. When we realized he was talking about a full-scale replica, his models weren't little toy models, they're this size. We looked at what he had to offer, and when we saw the 109, we realized that's not an aircraft we would reasonably be able to afford to buy for the museum. So even though it's a replica and it's essentially a plywood model, it fits a hole that we would normally have in our collection, so we appreciate that donation. So yes, it's a replica, but that's as close to a BF-109 as we can provide for you here at the San Diego Air and Space Museum.